With the successful launch of the Constitution class and numerous other vessel classes based on that design, Starfleet Command would embark on a shipbuilding frenzy the likes of which the galaxy had never seen before. And one of these new designs, the Atlas class, would end up signifying the end of an era and also bring about major changes to the organization itself, when the entire project would fail right in front of Starfleet's eyes. So what do we know about this outside-of-the-box design? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Atlas class as first seen in Star Trek Online, to better understand its place in Star Trek history. Please note, this is sort of an update of an older video I made. I say sort of because the video that I made was a combination of various TOS classes added to Star Trek Online in one of its expansions. I enjoyed the short story I created based around the available information of the time, but I always swore I would return to it one day when I had a 3D model to remake the class into its own dedicated video. And thanks once again to ThatGuyAndres, that day is finally here. Now, this is my own little bit of fan fiction for the design, and I think it makes sense as a cautionary tale and as a link between Starship design eras, with no disrespect meant towards Star Trek Online. But of course, as always, because this is just a little bit of my own fan fiction mixed with beta canon, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust, and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. With Starfleet Command in Starship Design Fever mode, the organization would allow its core of design engineers a lot of leeway to experiment with Starship designs. The Constitution class, which had been the jewel of Starfleet's crown, was beginning to lose its luster, as more and more of the starships were being destroyed or completely wrecked as Federation space expanded. In the 2260s, it seemed as though major threats were lurking behind each particle of space dust, and fear from the Federation's member worlds would drive Starfleet to create larger and more powerful vessel classes still based on the Constitution class design, which Starfleet intended to replace that aging class. But things did not go exactly to Starfleet's plan. The first of these super starship classes launched was the Federation-class Dreadnought in 2265. True to the Dreadnought name, this class was armed to the teeth, and intended to be used in military engagements. And since this class was geared towards defense of the Federation, meant that it couldn't be a true successor to the Constitution class. And so Starfleet approached their design engineers to create another class similar to the Dreadnought, but with exploration in mind. And with these seeds planted, the Atlas class would be born. Sitting at a length of 580 meters, the Atlas class was designed to be operated by 750 officers and crew members. In designing the Atlas class, the first thing that was done was to remove the thin neck connecting the saucer section to the engineering hull, replacing it with a much shorter and much thicker version, a type of design element which would be refined and eventually included within the Excelsior class. The second and more unusual design choice was in doubling the internal space of the Atlas class so it could include a secondary warp core. The primary warp core would handle all warp functions and provide power to most of the class's systems, while the secondary core was designed to supplement the starship's offensive and defensive systems, giving them a tremendous boost in power, at least in theory. The warp nacelles for this class were also redesigned, this time to merge what effectively was 4 different nacelles into a 2 nacelle design, again to minimize defensive weakness. As a result, the Atlas class would have a theoretical maximum cruising speed of warp factor 9, with an emergency maximum speed of warp factor 12 for 12 hours at a stretch. 8 phaser banks with 2 emitters each would provide the Atlas class with 360 degrees of target acquisition, with 4 photon torpedo launchers, 2 forward and 2 aft also included in the design. Shielding for the class would be standard for the time, but again due to being powered by the secondary warp core, it was believed this class's shields would be able to last over twice as long as its Federation-class dreadnought sister. Her hull would also be plated with a newly designed panel armor. This stronger and more durable alloy would eventually be used in the refit version of the Constitution class to greater effect. Another considered bizarre decision by Starfleet was to begin construction on 12 of the Atlas-class starships at the same time. Up to this point in Starfleet history, the standard procedure would be for Starfleet Command to construct a prototype of a new starship class, conduct a shakedown and analysis of that design before presenting it to the Federation Council for approval, and once approved, then construct whatever amount of said starship class was felt necessary. And although this was standard procedure, in actuality it was merely a courtesy rather than law, and this was the first time since the birth of the Federation that Starfleet Command had not followed this particular procedure, and this in itself would cause great tension with some of the Federation member worlds. Nevertheless, by the launch of the USS Atlas in 2269, Starfleet Command had high hopes for the class, and had gambled a lot on its design, making the class's failure even more hard-hitting than anyone could have predicted. Almost immediately during the shakedown cruise, it was quickly apparent that the dual-core system simply wouldn't work. Even though the secondary core was much smaller in design, it still generated far too much power for the starship to handle. The shield emitters it powered overloaded 43 seconds into their trial run, and to avoid a warp core breach, the secondary core had to be shut down while Starfleet's best and brightest analyzed the data on the system's failure. When warp speed trials began, again the Atlas class disappointed Starfleet, with the warp field that the new nacelles generated at speeds greater than warp factor 8 far too unstable to be maintained. Even the phaser batteries designed for the Atlas class failed to meet up to expectations. These new phaser batteries were designed to be continually charged by the new warp core, meaning that they could not be exhausted like those of the Constitution class. However, the recharge process failed, and so these new phaser batteries, which did allow for a 20% increase in phaser output, merely drained the phaser batteries of the Atlas class far faster than those in the Constitution and Federation class designs. Starfleet was completely unimpressed by the Atlas class, but their problems did not end there. The Federation Council began an inquest into the whole matter, calling upon Starfleet to account for its actions and poor decision-making in regards to the class. To make matters worse, several new technological developments, which had been backed by a younger contingent of newly promoted admirals, would be taking the Federation by storm when successfully tested on the USS Miranda. And these breakthroughs would make the Atlas class appear old before it had even been officially launched. And as a result, Starfleet Command would be compelled to admit defeat to the Federation Council, who in turn would usher out several admirals in Starfleet Command's echelon, forcing early retirement for those heads involved in the Atlas-class project. Because of its tarnished reputation, Starfleet Command would abandon future construction of any more vessels of this class, quietly downgrading its technology and sending each of the 12 starships constructed to obscure areas in the deep reaches of Federation space. And by the 2280s, the remaining Atlas-class starships would be ushered out of active service, quietly placed into Federation decommissioned shipyards. Created to solve a problem for Starfleet and the Federation, the Atlas class would end up exposing the larger problems with Starfleet and its aging admiralty, and how Starfleet's right hand seemed oblivious to what its left hand was doing, leading to an entire revamp of how Starfleet Command operated, and directly led to the creation of the Constitution class refit design in an effort to recapture the faith and reputation the Exploration and Defense Organization once held throughout the Federation. And thankfully, the new Admiralty would be successful in that goal, with the launch of the refit USS Enterprise in the early 2270s, earning the Atlas class its place as a cautionary warning in Starfleet history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the Atlas class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. Again, I want to say a huge thank you to ThatGuyAndres for providing me with the awesome 3D model of the Atlas class. Check out their links in the description below and send them some lovin'. Want to help the channel create a class of starship that won't embarrass all of Starfleet? Then consider becoming a channel patron. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching. Live long and prosper.